Oh my, that camera just started without my pushing anything. I was still fixing my hair. I'm so sorry. Well, welcome to GARBAUGUST week 2. Woohoo! It is a beautiful day here in Ontario. Absolutely gorgeous. And I am opening the window and sitting in the sunshine because for this week I read Flowers in the Attic. And I thought it was kind of apropos given how, for the last couple of years, a lot of people have been on lockdown. A lot of we've had a lot of isolation, and we're just kind of coming out of it now. And I wanted GARBAUGUST week 2 is the theme is vintage. And before we do that, I do want to welcome new subscribers. I'm at 76 now. Woo, woo, woo. So instead of toasting you with a coffee today, you know what? I tried to find powdered donuts, but unfortunately nobody seems to make them anymore. I can get them at Walmart, but I wasn't going to go all that way for a joke. So I had to settle for Timbits. So cheers to any new subscribers. We're at 76. I'm really happy everybody's here. All right. So, yes, I turned off the camera because I'm not going to subject my happy audience to watching me eat. Not a mukbang channel. And yeah, there's a bunch of stuff. Well, I mean, there's always a bunch of stuff in my car, but we're moving some stuff back and forth to storage. So that's what you're seeing behind me. All right, Flowers in the Attic. Now, I know a lot of people went with this one, so I'm jumping on the bandwagon. And it does check the bingo card for a book by our friend Virginia Andrews. But I wanted to go with this one because it does have a special place in my heart. I am a woman of a certain age, and it was re-released for its 40th anniversary back in 2019. And so the edition that I read on Kindle, and it's got a new foreword by Gillian Flynn, and she talks about, again, being a woman of a certain age and, clandestinely reading this book, and being fascinated by witchy, wicked women. And there are some fantastically evil women in this book. It's great. So I also gave it 4 trash cans. I mean, first of all, the writing is purple and ridiculous. Second, the subject matter is lurid and purports to be based on a true story. Again, famously, Virginia Andrews fell in love with a doctor when she went for some kind of spinal procedure, and he claimed that he and his siblings had been locked in an attic for 6 years. And I guess the original pitch there is a website. I was kind of looking around, and there's a website on one of the wikis that shows that they actually have the original letter that Virginia Andrews wrote to a publisher pitching the story. And in the original pitch, Chris and Kathy were 12 and 10 respectively, so they were even younger than the kids we see in the book, and the twins were 3. Now, I think that would be a little bit, I mean, it's an implausible enough story anyway, but that would be a really, really long, a long book, and 2, a couple kids just barely out of diapers. I think it would be really, really hard for kids that age to take care of kids that young. But anyway, so yeah, we had the original paperback when I was a kid, and we had that fantastic fold-out cover where you've got, Kathy's face, and then you open it, and there's like the kids, and the evil grandfather in the back as like the specter. And and I think it must have been my sister, because I know it wasn't me, and it wouldn't have been my mother, but I think somebody did mark the dirty parts. So so as you know, it's a pretty well-known story. They've filmed it twice. First in 1987 with the original Buffy, Christy Swanson as Kathy. And yes, she will always be Buffy to me. Oh, sacrilege. And then, and I guess another thing I read about that movie was that they had initially planned to make the sequel, Petals on the Wind, but both Louise Fletcher, who played the grandmother, and Christy Swanson, they were kind of shocked at how dirty the script was. So they ended up, I guess, I don't know why, but they ended up not, not going through with it. And so we only got the one. And at the ending of the original, the first 1987 film, the mother dies. So there is no possibility of a sequel, because the sequels to the books are all about Kathy getting her revenge on her mother, right? So, and then the third one is her mother getting her revenge on the sons, and then the fourth one, yeah. So there's a very definite formula to each series. So you have like the first one, which revolves around a female protagonist, and then you get like all the weird relationships and the rape and the incest and the child abuse. And then you get the fallout from that in the second book. And then the third is everybody's kind of grown up and dealing with it. And then there's like a fourth, which is like, you get multi-generational. And then the fifth is a prequel. And they've done this for pretty much every series from what I can figure out. So the basic plot is that this woman, Corinne, she has 4 beautiful children, handsome, perfect husband, perfect life. He dies in a car crash. She's 36 years old, and she's completely useless, absolutely useless. She never learned anything. She went to finishing school. She learned how to do crewel work, but she never learned any skills. She always thought she'd have a man to take care of her, and she'd always thought she'd have daddy's money. But she married her half-uncle, which we find out in the 5th book was actually her half-brother. Yes, I am spoiling everything, by the way, so, I mean, it's a 45-year-old book. I don't know what I'm spoiling. Well, 43. I don't know what I'm spoiling at this point. If you haven't read it, probably not. This isn't the review for you. So she writes to her mother, who hates her, takes her kids and locks them in the attic. Says she just needs to be re-inherited again. She was disinherited when all this happened, so she's got to go back and win back her father's affections. But it's just for one night, and then she kind of, she's like, oh well, it's just for a couple of nights. Well, we'll just, I'm getting back in his graces. It won't be about it. And she keeps calling him off, and months pass and years pass. And the kids start to lose faith. And then the mother stops coming around. So at first she came to visit them every day, and she was trying to go to secretarial school. Can't see a woman like that doing that, but and their grandmother is this insane zealot fundamentalist. God sees everything. And she tells them, you can't look at each other, and you can't bathe together, and even though she stuffs 4 children, 2 of them on the brink of puberty, into a room together, and then tells them not to look at each other. Of all of the bad ideas. So anyway, of course, eventually she does catch them, looking at each other, touching each other, whatever, and beats them senseless, and puts tar in Kathy's hair, and she's just an absolutely horrible person. And the kids are able at some point to crawl out on the roof and eventually run out and go skinny dipping, but they decide, okay, we're gonna die here, so maybe we should figure out how to leave. So they make a copy of their mother's key when she's not looking, and then they're able to run out, steal stuff. And I mean, there's a lot of things that happen, and yes, there is the rape and the incest, and you can read it for yourself. It's pretty lurid. And then ultimately, they do manage to escape, and then, oh yeah, and okay, so their mother, so eventually their brother dies, the little boy dies, and they figure out that they're being poisoned, and that's why they decide, okay, we gotta leave. So here's the difference. Okay, to me, now I'm not a lawyer. I have a friend who's a lawyer. it seems a bit of a stretch that a dead person can dictate whether a person has kids or not. Like, the person's dead. Why do they care? So I said, can a person do that? I said to the lawyers in the house. And I actually did get an answer. I looked up Virginia state law, Virginia inheritance law. And basically, in Virginia, if you have a will, they try to go by your will. But my ex-lawyer contact, he's one of my Facebook friends, he's a pretty cool guy, he pointed out that the courts frown on anybody trying to tell anybody else how to live their life. If you want to control something, you would have to put the money in trust, and that trust would be in place as long as the person followed the conditions. But they look, they don't look fondly on somebody trying to dictate things like being married or, and it is also the plot hinged on, Corinne tried to kill her kids because her dad put her back in the will, but added a codicil is that, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but added something that said if it ever turned out that she'd had children, she'd be disinherited. And just because he's a big old douchey dick face, if she had children from any subsequent marriages, she would also be disinherited. So this is why she tried to kill her kids, even though she was subsequently married. And she was married to a lawyer. He could have found a way around it if he was worth anything as a lawyer. So it always bothered that whole, the whole plot hinges on this, and it just bothered me because you can't do that. There's a serious artistic license going on here, but it just bugs me. So, yeah, so that's Flowers in the Attic in a nutshell. And, I thought, like, yesterday I was about the 200-page mark, and I was kind of skimming through it, because I have read it many times. I recently listened to the audiobook, and I thought this was going to be a book I would DNF, but, the second half of it just sucked me right in. And Virginia Andrews herself, she said, I may not be the best writer, but I can tell a rip-roaring story, she said. So I agree with her. The story, ludicrous and ridiculous as it is, as much of a drama queen as Carrie is, as much as the writing can be terrible at times, it's a great story. And so 4 big trash cans, great big fun trash cans out of 5. And and that was the other thing about my lawyer friend. He said you can't disinherit somebody once they've inherited the money. It's very, very hard to go, well, you can't have it now, especially after you're already dead. So yes, big old artistic license there on the law. Now, the other book that I read for our vintage GARBAUGUST is Let's Go Play at the Atoms by Mendal W. Johnson. And again, this is another pretty popular choice. I gave it 3 trash cans. This one's a little bit better than Flowers in the Attic. Now, I had chosen this actually before I started looking at other people's lists and watching other people's reviews of it. But the funny thing, I read this one in that I read a lot of paperback horror between the ages of probably 12 to 15. So this was one of the books that I read then. So this would have been late 80s, early 90s. And excuse me. And I remember being on this message board in the mid 90s. You remember those? The little mainframe computers and the Usenet groups. And so I was on one of those, and we were talking about nasty books, and I said, yeah, I read this book, and it was about these kids that kill their babysitter, and they tie her up and torture her, and it was just like the nastiest book. It was called something like Let's Go Play at the Atoms, but I can't remember exactly what the title is, and I don't remember the author. And then other people jumped on the thread, and they're like, yeah, I read that book too. Oh, it was awful. I can't remember the title either. I can't remember the author. And we went back and forth like this for like a whole thread until somebody kind of stepped in and said, if this was such a memorably horrible book, how come nobody can remember the title or who wrote it? So anyway, so that's like my memory of this book. But through this, it kind of gained a cult following, and through these kind of discussions. And it became known this is one of those books that the backstory is almost as interesting as the book itself. Mendal W. Johnson, this was the only book that he wrote, and he was unfortunately an alcoholic. And the book put him into such a dark place that he started drinking again and died of cirrhosis of the liver 2 years after it was published. It was the only book he ever published. So it's become kind of known as the book that killed the author. And then through this cult following and through an entry in Grady Hendrix' Paperbacks from Hell, which I still highly recommend everybody read. It has been reissued by Valancourt Books, so you can get your hands on it. And the other thing that's interesting about the book is that there was a sequel written that basically leaves out the last chapter and kind of rewrites, retcons what happens, and then decides to follow the kids and, their punishment. And it was self-published by the writer who wrote it. I can't remember his name. On the web, but I haven't been able to track down a copy of it to read it and tell it to you. And then there was another self-published sequel called Let's Go Play at the Adams 2, which I actually did grab and started reading, but it doesn't appear to have anything to do with the original story. And apparently the author's talking about threads from the original book, so I have no idea. So if I do get around to reading it, I will review it for you, but so far, the first chapter's not very good. I kind of left it off. All right, so back to the plot. Basically, it's about this young woman named Barbara. She's hired to babysit 2 young kids, Bobby, who's 13, and his little sister, Cindy, who's 10. Their parents have gone to Europe for a couple of weeks. And on the 4th night, she wakes up, or I guess the morning of the 5th day, Barbara wakes up and she's tied to the bed. Bobby had chloroformed her during the night. Sorry about that, my neighbor walked by. So they had chloroformed her during the night and tied her to the bed, and then they start having to figure out what they're going to do with her, because, I mean, it's like the dog chasing the bus. Like, what happens when he catches it, right? So at first it's just a game, and they include their neighbors, John, who's 16, Paul, who's 13 like Bobby, but he's the twitchy weird one, and his sister Diane. And they call themselves the Freedom Five. Now it's loosely based on the Sylvia Likens case, who was a teenager in Indiana who was murdered by her, the woman that was supposed to be taking care of her, and all of the neighborhood teenagers joined in. And obviously, Let's Go Play at the Adams was apparently an influence on Jack Ketchum's The Girl Next Door, but I reviewed The Girl Next Door before here. I think that The Girl Next Door was the superior book. And my reason, and other people think that Let's Go Play at the Adams is the better book. I mean, we can compare. There's no right answer here. It's just which one you like better. But the reason that I think that The Girl Next Door was the superior book was that Let's Go Play at the Adams, it depends on a series of contrivances. The plot depends on these things have to happen. So, first of all, you have this beautiful, isolated lakeside setting that is miles and miles away from the nearest neighbors. So the plot has to take place in isolation, which means that the family has a tremendous amount of money. And they're so rich that the parents can fly off to Europe for a couple of weeks and pay some girl and never even call their kids. I mean, I found that a little contrived. Like, I mean, okay, I know in the early 70s, long distance was a lot more expensive, but I would have thought that they would have at least checked in once. And also Barbara at 20. When I was 20 and I was a university student, I still talk to my mother once a week. You know, either she called me or I called her. Why didn't Barbara's parents ever check in at any point? None of the other adults checked in at any point. It was like they all dropped dead somehow. So I found that, so there's a contrivance there where these kids have this total isolation, total privacy. Nobody's checking on them. They don't need to go for groceries. You know, they live on sandwiches and Coke, and which is fine. I'm sure that the adults would have stocked up before they left, but still, they're still, I mean, when you have kids, you have to go to the store every day for something. Like, you just, you know, you run out of stuff, milk and whatever. And they actually do get a grocery run at one point, but I mean, it's contrivances, and then they get the adults out of there. And then, so in addition to the isolated setting, nobody checking in, they have to have access to the tools that they need, like chloroform, and it happens to be on a dock, so everybody's got tons of rope. And everybody happens to have guns, and everybody happens to have these things. You know, I mean, there's just this tremendous contrivance in order for this whole thing to happen. And I'm not to say that it can't happen, but it can only happen in this time and in this way, and there has to be a sort of perfect setting for it. And so it also kind of takes forever to end. Whereas and then they also, there's the other plot contrivance that the kids get away with it because, by the way, spoilers. The kids get away with it because there happens to be an itinerant worker that they can pin it on, you know, say, he's the one that did it. And then the kids shot him and they become heroes. And, you know, and again, there's just a whole series of plot contrivances that this needs to hang on. So, and the reason I think that The Girl Next Door was the better book was that there was an adult involved. There was a tremendous amount of bystander syndrome going on. All this horrible stuff was happening, but nobody said anything. And it happened in a setting, and what made it so disturbing was that it happened in a setting we see all the time. I mean, there's that adult where the kids go and party, you know, the lax adult where the kids go and party, and there's always booze around. I mean, in my neighborhood back in the late 90s, there was, you know, there was a house like that. The teenagers came around, all the kids went there for sleepovers. Something like that could have easily happened in a house like that with the wrong person in charge. And that was what made it so chilling, was that and obviously the Sylvia Likens case, it did happen. So it wasn't something that needed to hang on a series of contrivances, because it was something that this could be any one of your neighbors. These could be the neighborhood kids. Whereas Let's Go Play at the Adams, again, it's a pretty good story. It's the pacing's a little bit choppy. The characters, and this is another thing that I found a little frustrating. I read that Mendal Johnson wanted to make it some kind of a political statement, which I don't quite understand. So the characters don't move and talk like people. They kind of become weird mouthpieces, but it's never really clear what he's saying. so they don't really come across as realistic characters. And there was something else I wanted to say. The characters, I don't know, must have been a lie. And yeah, they have a tendency to sort of stand there and pontificate, and there's a lot of talk about the weather, which is fine. I mean, it's a nice summer dock setting. You have this beautiful, idyllic property. Everybody would love to have the money to live like this. And then there's all this horror against it. I get it. But there is a little bit too much focus on that kind of stuff. And I mean, the book itself is only 207 pages, but there are places that actually manage to drag. Because again, I mean, a girl tied to a bed, not a lot can happen unless you want to just sit there and torture her the whole time. So there is a lot of pontificating that's going to end up happening. So that is GARBAUGUST week number 2, and I hope you join us next week for week 3, and anything goes. And I hope you're reading horror. Hope you're reading lots of great stuff. Have a great day.